Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects its nether region with NordVPN today. Welcome to Wagon Wheel. I'm Jarrod Kimber. Sorry, this one is delayed a couple of days, but Christmas and illness merged in my family, and so everything went a little bit to hell. But I'm here, and if you're new to Wagon Wheel, essentially all we do is answer your questions. If you're in the chat room today of the YouTube, the best way of doing it is with a super chat. Feel free if you want to just put a normal one in. I'll see if I can get to them. But for everyone else, Patreon is the best way of getting your questions in, like quite a few people have today. And we will start with Ben, who says, cricket history, what if? If underarm and overarm bowling split into two different sports, how do you see them developing in that timeline? Would they eventually reunite? Or would you expect, oh, don't know what happened to the end of the question there. That one, Mookie might have eaten the end of that question. But yeah, so for those who don't know, it was ridiculous that we spent so long in cricket fighting overarm bowling as it was, basically because a bunch of rich people wanted to continue to be able to play and they realized that they weren't athletic enough to be able to handle overarm bowling. So yeah, it was a very interesting time in cricket. I've often said, for cricket history, what if? The more interesting one is if we do ban overarm bowling, then cricket becomes more like croquet, polo, perhaps, those sorts of sports. Although not, it would just have been an elite sport. I think it would have stayed in that kind of an area. But yeah, then you have the rugby league, rugby union split, I suppose, is maybe one of the most dramatic splits that we've seen in sport. I mean, you could argue the cricket and baseball split, but I think they split from a common ancestor sport rather than from each other. But yeah, rugby league and rugby union certainly had a split. So we know that once that happens, they're probably not going to come back together. I can't see any reason why they would have, because you would have probably had professionals and people who really like the spectacle on one side and people who like the tradition and being fancy and posh on the other side. So I don't think the two sports would have ever come back together. And obviously underarm cricket, which I suppose would have been called cricket, would have been just played by really boring people in garden parties and things like that. And overarm cricket would have had to have had a new name. I don't know, wicket, perhaps. Or I don't know, cricket overarm? No, it couldn't have been that. I don't know. That's a fun would have. And yeah, it would have been a completely different sport. And it would have gone on to be as successful. I might not have got as successful as quickly just because there would have been another form of cricket. Remember, it's not until really World War I that underarm bowling completely disappears. So it's not as if it was as simple as overarm bowling would have taken over straight away. I think it would have actually struggled to gain foothold. All the big grounds probably would have already been wouldn't have even been allowed to play the overarm game to start with and everything else. But eventually the money would have been too big. We certainly see around that 1830s, 1840s period where you have sort of independent cricket teams starting to pop up and everything else. So it would have taken a little bit longer. But just a brief one on the history of underarm and overarm cricket. One of the reasons that W.G. Grace kind of batted the way he did and changed modern batting is because he faced underarm and overarm bowling. So it does tell you how long it lasted and how long it was certainly around and still an important part of cricket, underarm bowling. Partly because the pitches were terrible. So rolling the ball along the ground or getting it to bounce a couple of times was still quite tricky. Rudra says, is India going to go through another 2011-2014 rough patch? Probably not that bad. I know that they've already started phasing out some of the older batters, but the spin bowling is also aging, and I don't know how long they will have this strong of a unit of fast bowlers with reliance on Bumrah's fitness and Siraj becoming more consistent. Yeah, I think Siraj is fantastic, so I don't really have a big issue with that. I think Siraj should only get better and better until he loses his athleticism. I suppose Bumrah and Shami leaving means that Arshdeep, Prashid Krishna, forgetting someone else. There's a couple of others, of course, coming through, needs to step up. I think that's fair, and perhaps there'll be a slight regression there. Ashwin, as long as his body stays okay, should be able to play for a couple more years. Jadeja still looks really, really fit. Akshar Patel probably won't want to retire early, considering he's taken him so long to get to the level he's at. Who have you got? Kuldeep Yadav is an incredible spinner. So I'm not, and I think the batting's fine. It might be a changing of the guard, and so there might be a slip back, but I don't think they're going to be not in the best 3 teams in the world or anything like that. James says, other than cost and profitability considerations, would there be anything to stop, for example, Australia playing concurrent test series, one on tour to, say, England in their summer and another at home in a tropical dry season against Ireland with essentially the A team? But as Australia, having full test status and satisfying FTB commitments, I imagine India could do similarly if they wanted to. Well, we've seen this before, right? England have been doing this. Australia played a T20 in Australia and the next day played a test match in Sri Lanka, I want to say. I think it was Sri Lanka. So, I mean, it's already happened. Obviously, there has been concurrent test matches played from the same team. England did not play England. England played New Zealand and West Indies at the same time. I was in 1929. Probably didn't send their strongest team on either of those tours because they were 2 new teams. I don't think any team's ever played twice on the same day. That might be pushing it too far, but we've certainly come close enough to that now, haven't we? Where in 2 different formats teams are playing. I don't see there's really any point in playing 2 different series at the exact same time. Not to say maybe it could still happen or could still work or whatever, but I don't see that, James, as something that is necessarily a good way of doing things. But there's nothing within the FTP that suggests you can't, as far as I'm aware, and maybe no one's ever tried it before, but as far as I'm aware, there's nothing in the FTP that suggests you can't do it. But I don't think it's something that people would want. For instance, I know they're little things, but generally now you have sort of coaching staff that are more towards different formats, right? They might be the Australian bowling coach, but they might actually focus more on, one-day cricket or T20 cricket or whatever that may be. So it actually starts to get to the point where it's a little bit more up and down in that kind of way. James says, what do you think of the idea of cricket adopting the baseball concept of earned and unearned runs for bowling analysis? E.g., runs resulting from a misfield would be unearned as would runs made by batter after a misfield. So I actually talked about this years ago. 2018, I wrote about this, James. It doesn't really make sense to me. I think it was Sam Curran did a wide down the leg side recently in an England game. And it was a wide. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't a good ball, but it was easily wicket kept to, and it went through Josh Butler's legs. And of course, it goes on Sam Curran's figures. And, he was struggling. I think he had one good comeback game at that point, but he was still struggling overall. And I do think it's just ridiculous that we have that. Like, an overthrow shouldn't go against the bowler's figures. Even, there's even interesting stuff around edges, that I think is quite interesting looking at going ahead. And I suppose some of that we can work out with control and not in control stats and everything else. But yeah, I do think it's kind of nonsense the way that we do it at the moment. But I think until we fix fielding stats, I don't think, James, we're going to make a big change there. Oh, Simon Nathan's gone nuts here. What's with the craze for bowlers like Cummins and Stark in the IPL? Are they really the best 15 or 20 T20 bowlers in the world? That's not what they need to be. They need to be in the top 5 available bowlers. And out of Stark, Cummins, and Ferguson, someone was going to get a lot of money. I think they probably made a mistake. I think Ferguson's maybe the one I would have invested in, but Stark and Cummins can bat better than Ferguson, so there is a little bit of extra ability there. They just won a World Cup. There's a bit of a bump. Stark has been magnificent in the one time he was in the IPL. I don't think he's that bowler anymore, but still. Cummins possibly is being picked as a captain. I don't know if anything's been announced, being out of the loop since the auction, but I think that's a big part of it. What do you think of teams releasing injured players? Isn't it fundamentally contrary to player rights and basic decency? Isn't it fundamentally contrary to player rights? I mean, not. I mean, teams always do that, right? Like, you get guys like Pat Cummins who stayed on Australia's books for 4 or 5 years. Generally, you don't, and you see players like, I'm trying to think of some off the top of my head. There's certainly been some bowlers that were without contracts at times. I can't think. I know there's been some in Shield cricket that are really, really obvious, where they don't have contracts even domestically, despite the fact that they're international quality bowlers. It's the business, right? Like, sadly, like if you can't perform, then you're not there. But teams, I think, more often than not, teams are pretty good. But if you're going into a season, and you don't have the ability to actually pay a player. Sorry, I said it right the first time. Play a player. Pick them in your team. So you're going in with a lesser availability for every time, especially from overseas players' perspective. I don't think there are enough overseas players in squads. I think the local players is probably good, but I think the overseas players is probably not enough, and that causes some of this as an issue. Probably want to keep Jofra for one more year, right? And then see how that goes. But yeah, sadly, it's just what professional sport is. I don't think there's much else you can do about that. In your opinion, was the fixing scandal in the IPL properly dealt with, or things swept under the rug? Things were massively swept under the rug. What are we talking about here? Yeah, it was ridiculous, right? But I think they are kind of in most fixing scandals. So I've said this from the start. Well, I should say I've been saying this for a long time. When drugs got really bad in sport, we brought about the WADA organization. Now, WADA has its issues, certainly, especially in modern sport. But having an independent group who oversaw drug testing, whose job it was to weed that out of sport, meant that we knew a lot more about drugs than we ever had before. Corruption in sport is way worse than drugs has ever been. And in fact, corruption in sports allows for drugs. Right. So most of the drugs cases now, I would say, are probably major corruption within sports, not like a one-off athlete going off and getting some injections. And yet we have no one looking into corruption in sport. And what happens is you get a situation where someone like Srisanth takes the brunt of it, a couple of lower down players even further down than him, and then you move on. And we've seen that again and again in cricket. And cricket boards don't want to really get him. It doesn't help world cricket for them to be involved in corruption scandals, right? So why would they be looking for these things? They just want it to go away as quickly as possible. Simon Nathan says, in your documentary, I kind of got an impression that we're calling Test cricket, real cricket, and T20 as just a sideshow. This is contrary to what I know of you. Has your opinion changed since the days of the documentary? No, we weren't really calling. Yeah, I think that's a misunderstanding. Unless I actually said that sentence, and I don't remember saying it. That's a little bit different. I think what we were more saying is that the hardest form and the best form of cricket is 5-day cricket, right? And it is literally a better sport than T20. Doesn't mean that T20 won't go on to make more money, right? Not the best sport doesn't always win. The best singer in the world is not the person who sells the most albums, right? It's about brand and image and accessibility and fan bases and everything else. I think what we were saying is that the way that T20 was being run specifically at that point, it was being run as a disposable form of entertainment, right? My biggest issue with T20 from the start is that it hasn't been run seriously like a sport, and still isn't in many cases. In fact, I can't think of a single T20 competition in the world that puts the sport first, right? Make sure that that product on the field is absolutely perfect and is of the highest quality that it can be, and then works back from there, right? And that's fine, but that is a little bit different to what Test cricket is. Test cricket has some of those advantages naturally, of course, and T20 did start as a novelty. And when we started making that film, it was 2011, right? T20 was really, I know it was a decade in, but was really 2 or 3 years in, right? Of being anything. And I think we I think the line in the film, which Sam says, not me. Don't forget, I'm not the only person who made it. It's a bunch of editors as well. So it's not a personal doctrine of mine, that film. I'm just one of the many voices in it. I think one of the things when you go back and you watch it, Sam says, is this really sport? But he's not talking about T20. He's talking about the circus element around it, right? You got to remember, especially early T20, it was very cheerleaders and Lalit Modi on 2 mobile phones at the same time. And it was entertainment as sport. And it's become more sporty, right? But no, I mean, if you go back to my early works, you'll see that I was taking T20 seriously quite early on. I think in 2008, I started doing analysis on T20. So that's probably, I don't know, 5 years before someone like Freddie Wild comes along. There wasn't any money in it back in those days. Freddie would say probably up until recently, there wasn't a lot of money in it for him either. But it didn't really work. And I was always pulled back to Test cricket. But it's always been my second favorite format of cricket. But the circus element was pretty ridiculous and still is to a certain point. Yeah. You know, when you talk to cricket boards and people who run these boards, it feels to me they very rarely know what is good for sport. Doesn't mean that they're not often good at marketing and other decisions and, you know, PR and all those sorts of things. But, you know, on a very basic level, right across our sport, we've never really looked after the balls. The fact that the balls that are used in T20 cricket and World Cups were changed by one manufacturer and no one in cricket knew, I think tells you everything that you need to know about how seriously they are taking the sport. And I think that was something that that was even more prevalent around 2011, 2015, which is the time period that we made that movie. Some of it will be that. Ben says, is Livingston simply out of form, or is the clear plan from everyone to bowl outside his off stump so he can't moose it over the onside, causing an actual issue for him? Yeah, I feel like it wasn't that long ago. Livingston looked really good. I would have to go through his, last few games, but last 10 or so games. But it's interesting that people keep saying he's out of form. He's got starts in almost every game except for one, right? So he made 28, 54 not out in one game, 30, 17, 27, 45, 17, 2, and 27. It would be hard to say that is someone who is not particularly playing well. That doesn't mean that strike rates don't play a part in that. So I'm just trying to bring up the where are we? Batting innings list. That'll do for him. So he had a strike rate of 130, 142, 188, 166, 257, and then 96 in that last game. I mean, that seems okay, doesn't it? It feels like to me that he's taking a big amount of brunt from what happened in the World Cup. I saw him Southampton, and so perhaps I'm a little bit warped by that because I saw it, up close. And clearly he didn't make any runs in the World Cup after that. But, he's, I think he made, let's have a look, one of the West Indies game. He made the 45 in the West Indies ODI as well. Perhaps teams have wised up a little bit on how to bowl to him more than they had before. But I certainly don't see it as a huge issue with him. So I'm not seeing what everyone else is seeing, if we're being honest at the moment. I think he's taking a lot of flack for the fact that Root and Brooks, who else was it? Bairstow didn't make any runs. And Livingston seems to be getting more flack from it. So I don't understand it the same way that everyone else does. I think I must rate him a lot higher naturally than other people do. Oh. Richard says, going forward, are there going to be more T20 teams that do not bother getting really strong bowling attacks and just back themselves to chase 200 on flat pitches? Or will more teams go the other way with them backing themselves to win on doctored, not meant in negative away conditions? Yeah, I've always said T20 cricket has the most doctored wickets. I find it hilarious. People think it's international cricket. No. You have to, I think what you have to start doing in T20 cricket, and you can throw one-day cricket in this as well, but certainly in T20 cricket, is you have to start thinking as batting as offense and bowling as defense. So what you're asking is, will teams go all out on offense and have no defense, right? The chances of them doing that and consistently winning lessen, because that means their batting has got to be above average every single time they go out. They're giving themselves no second bite of the cherry, right? Their batting not only has to be good, but above good every time, right? In order to go off. That's not a realistic way of playing, right? It doesn't work. So from that perspective, I don't really understand why people think that that is the best way of going about things. And that's the best way of looking at it. I still think in leagues, you'll see plenty of teams who, if you have a wicket that seams around early, then you're going to have good seam bowlers. If you have wickets that you lose the steam out of the pitch later on, or the ball goes a bit weird, then you want slow ball bowlers, and obviously wickets that turn or keep low, you might want spinners, whatever that may be. I still think that's a better way of playing, because you can control one. That's one part of the game you control. I think teams have got to this naturally, but fans haven't got to this naturally, which is, if you can win 80% of your home games and 50% of your away games, you're going to be in the finals every year, and you give yourself a big chance of winning, right? And so, having bowlers that match your conditions makes a lot more sense. Now, you could also have batters that match your conditions, right? It's not just a bowlers thing. So there is certainly a way of doing that. But you can't just have one side of the ball. We're seeing England now, when their batting failed a little bit in the World Cup and their bowling just wasn't as good, how that struggles. We've seen it with Pakistan as well, at times before. I'm trying to think if there are any other one-sided international teams. Zimbabwe is a really good example of this. Of their bowling is absolutely world-class, maybe top 8 bowling attacks in the world, and their batting is maybe 14th or 15th best, right? And so how do you win games? Your bowling has to be absolutely brilliant every single time, and that's just so unlikely. Ali says, the current Australia-Pakistan series has some Pakistani sponsors instead of Australian sponsors. Is that a bad sign? Does that mean that Australia doesn't make money from bilaterals if it's not the Ashes or BGT? I don't. This is a really interesting question, because there's an Australian university, Eddie Cowan University in Western Australia. It may not be called Eddie Cowan, but more or less. If you go and you have a look at cricket grounds from all around the world for years, Eddie Cowan University has sponsored them. The actual signage around the grounds is not a very expensive sponsorship, and you quite often get these really, really new, boutique, unique, niche advertising around those grounds, and so you will see that. We've seen also the opposite at times, where for certain series in other countries we could do that. You're not talking about millions and millions of dollars here. You're talking about Cricket Australia just going to take the money from the first people that come to their mind. I actually think not international brands, but Pakistani brands, so India's done quite well, but I think like Sri Lankan brands and Pakistani brands, English brands, South African brands at times have actually not factored in that you can buy overseas rights, and sometimes you might be able to get them quite cheap in certain grounds and certain environments for certain matches and those sorts of things. So no, it should be like that, because both set of fans should be watching the game. So why would you only want one set of sponsorship? It should mean that you make more money as a cricket board in the future. And I would be actively, if I was working for a cricket board, I'd be actively looking up some of the sponsors in Pakistan or West Indies or whoever it may be, and going to them and saying to Digicel, do you want to come in? Because that means that then the Australian brands are going to have to pay more money as well. All right, let's take a quick break here. And then after the break, we'll get to the chats. Moku's not giving me any long ads, has he? Moku, you see my long ads here. I might have to play a couple of ads back to back, and then we'll be back in a moment with questions from the group. This is Wagon Wheel. I'm Jarrod Kimber. I'm a test guy, but I understand I live in a T20 world. So I'm still going to chat for hours about the inner workings of wrist positions or make long-form documentaries on Kiwi openers. But I also have to work out how to make that work for the T20 society we live in. Well, actually, I don't do that. That is what Memento does. Its artificial intelligence takes my test-length videos and podcasts and turns them into death hitting in T20. Short, sharp, wearing matching outfits. If you make content and you want to slice it up into individual innings, get Memento. All right, I'm going to play another ad. I know it's annoying, but just bear with me so I can read more of your questions. I will be back. We'll go Nord again. So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your Nord VPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects its nether region with NordVPN today. All right, welcome back. Yeah, Denji says, "Love your videos." Love you, Denji. When can we expect the video on the IPL auction? So, I'm trying to remember. So the IPL auction was Tuesday, was it? What's today? Saturday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whenever it was. And I'd done a massive amount of work, but I didn't realize at the time I was really sick. I was actually commentating the West Indies England game, and I didn't realize how sick I was. I basically didn't get out of bed for about 36 hours after that. But I'd done a bunch of work in that afternoon going into that game. And then I did a bunch of work. I actually finished that game, came home around, 1 a.m. and then did more work. And then I looked at it and everything I did didn't add up mathematically. It was just like bizarre what I had done. And so very fair to say that I couldn't put it out as something. I will go back and hopefully, it shouldn't take me too long. I had to find out, I wanted to come up with a new formula for the team maps. But there's no hurry now. I mean, I've already missed the actual IPL auction. There's a couple of test matches, but I'm sure I'll be able to do it in the next couple of weeks and get it out. We've got a bit of a gap. So I think I'll be doing the India-South Africa test matches, and then I'll be doing India-England test matches. So there's a bit of a gap in the middle. We've got a heap of content because I got sick. We have a Nathan Lyon video we haven't put up yet. We've got a Meg Lanning video we haven't put up yet. I think we've got India-South Africa a video that we haven't put up, and there's something else as well. So there's sadly heaps of stuff that we just haven't got to at the moment. That's kind of on the backlog, and we didn't even get to this. So yeah, illnesses of myself, but also my family, kind of slowed me down. Shrikant says, "Is the white ball more unpredictable with the degree of swing relative to the red ball? Is there more randomness?" You're in WRT here. I'm not sure what that means. Shrikant. But thank you very much for the super chat. Remember, if you're desperate for a question to be answered, super chat's the way to go. Is the white ball more random? The white ball swings. This is what cricketers have told me. The white ball swings in a way that is harder to harness. So you don't see as many red ball swinging sort of violently away where, the wicketkeeper's having to run around everywhere. And the white ball does tend to do that a little bit more. But I wonder if it's also because the white ball swings for such a short period of time, whereas even a red ball kookaburra might swing for, 10 or 12 overs, and a Dukes might swing for 70 or 80, depending on, certain situations. And SG will swing for, 6 or 8 overs. You get a little bit maybe more used to those balls. So I don't know if that is part of it, but from what I've heard from bowlers, and I don't know if this has been tested, but I don't think it has. It's a little bit harder to control the swing of a white ball than it is the swing of a red ball, which I suppose means it's more unpredictable. But I don't think it's so much as unpredictable is just if you get the red ball exactly coming out your hand perfectly, you kind of know what it should do. Whereas with a white ball, you might do the exact same thing, and it might go a little bit further. I think that is the best way of answering that, Shrikant. But thank you very much for your super chat. MFGM says, ask the super chat from the Wagon Wheel that was cancelled the other day. But this is the Wagon Wheel. But I didn't see your question, Jim. So you might have got them in after the deadline anyway. But you're here now, Jim. We're here. I want to become a left-arm finger spinner when my body can't bowl pace anymore. Any tips? It's about your hips. I didn't mean to have a tips about hips, but here we are. What Elvis Presley thing. Finger spin specifically, but wrist spin as well, is about your hips. So it's about the rotation of your hips. So a lot of people do all the work with their hand and their arm. right? But you actually need your hips to come through. So as you're delivering the ball, the back hip should be, coming through, so that your whole body is rotating, not just your hands. So that's the best way of doing it. And the other thing is that you need to be prepared for the fact that you're going to get calluses. Like if you do it properly and you stick the ball in your fingers, there are going to be calluses in your fingers from that. And the only third thing I would say is don't just bowl with the seam in one position. I would say there's 3 different kinds of grips now. There's sort of your conventional with the seam across your fingertips. And then have one where you start with your fingers in the middle of the ball, and then another one where it's just almost like a random generation type thing. Shramana says, how do they pick players for women's test matches when they've got no domestic performance to base it on? Well, they have some domestic performance, but not much. Yeah, it is very random. It's very unprofessional. They're really looking for skills in white ball cricket that they think will then work in red ball cricket. So we did the commentary the other day for TalkSport on the India-England women's game, and me and Raf were talking about that, and she said it's one of the bigger issues, right? Like you don't really know if anyone is suited to this format just because they haven't played enough of it, and the numbers are not particularly easy to accessible even for fans to kind of look at them. Hypo course probably has them, but the rest of us, I can't even find the multi-day cricket format. Like I was trying to find stats on that and couldn't find them. So we don't even know if they picked the wrong players, but they don't play enough of it anyway. It's a big issue with women's tests going ahead. Is that there were times when they were doing things in that India-England game, and there were some odd things done, but I don't know if it's right or wrong because I don't see much multi-day women's cricket. They play some around the corner from me. The Kent team sometimes plays here. I've seen a little bit there. Hey, thumbs up, Spec. I see a little bit of it there, but even then, I probably haven't seen more than 3 or 4 days of it. Domestic women's cricket. I don't think I ever saw any domestic multi-day cricket in Australia for women's cricket. So I'm sitting there trying to analyze something that I don't really understand, and I think that's also the case for the teams as well. Abby says, I'm from India and I really like your work and I would like to support you via Patreon. Be like Abby, everyone. What's the rest of you? Can you tell me how to become your Patreon member? I think it's as simple. I'll just go see if I can do this right now. If you're right, Jarrod Kimber, I spelled my own name wrong there, and you write Patreon in, it comes straight up. But it's as simple as it is patreon.com /Jarrod Kimber. You might have to spell my name correctly. My name in the show. My name's in here. You can just copy and paste. If you want to ask questions on this show, it's the first class and above, but there's many different levels you can do. I think it's the bottom level, which is the club cricket level. You get access to all the podcasts ad-free. And as you go up, you get all sorts of different things, but everyone gets access to ad-free podcasts. Everyone gets access to the Discord and the monthly AMA. And then the more you pay, the more other access that you get on your way up. But thank you very much, Abby. And to everyone who supports us on Patreon, it's huge for us to know, because what Patreon is, it's a really consistent payment, whereas advertisers come and go, right? So knowing that, it helps us. And all the Patreon money goes back into the staff who work for us. So you can literally you can pay Patreon money, find Muku, and tell him that he put the font in an unreadable thing for Wagon Wheel. That's what you're allowed to do. Muku may not like that. Tino says, what made you support the various sports teams you support, aside from Collingwood, which was, I assume, through family? Yeah, I mean, my family's half North Melbourne, Kangaroos. I don't think they're called North Melbourne anymore, are they? And Collingwood, but my dad was a huge Collingwood supporter. And my mum had been a huge North supporter, but it probably died down by that stage. So there wasn't much of a battle between her and my old man. My dad now has memberships for all my grandchildren, all his grandchildren as well. So he's quite full on. So yeah, that was natural. I'm trying to think of other teams I support. I support Port Melbourne in the old VFL. That was again through family. That was actually both sides of my family. I think everyone in my family supported Port, the Borough. I do have a Borough jumper, actually. I should wear that on one day. Who else do I support? The Nuggets. The Nuggets was really, started to get massively into basketball, and supported North Melbourne Giants because I was from the northern suburbs. They were the northern suburbs team when I was growing up in the local league. That team changed names so many times. I'm not actually sure if North Melbourne Giants is technically still a team, but they were certainly the team that I started supporting them. And then there was the Bulleen Boomers, which was the women's basketball. Again, they were the northern suburbs team, and I could go watch them. They used to play around the corner from my house. So I watched a lot of women's basketball just before the WNBA started. And then, so you'd be sitting in an arena with like 30 people watching these players, and then, and mostly family and friends, and just a couple of basketball geeks like me. Then a couple of years later, all those women got picked up by the WNBA and went over and played. So yeah, those were both location-based teams. So the Denver Nuggets was different. So I got into basketball, and then it must have been the 91 draft, I think, or 92 draft, when Dikembe Mutombo came out. At that stage, I didn't have a team. And for whatever reason, I didn't particularly like the Bulls. I probably was more into the Pistons, the Lakers, and the Celtics, but they were all kind of on the downward at that point. Their players were aging out, and during that draft, we used to get everything through. In fact, if you're a basketball fan not from America, you probably know what I'm talking about. NBA. Oh God, I've forgotten the name of it. But the NBA show that they would send out a half-an-hour show with oh my God, I can't remember any of the names of the people. But Michael Jordan's friend. What was his show called? Ahmed Rashad, and what was his show called? So we all got that, and basketball cards were becoming really, really big at that stage as well. And so you would get the 30 minutes of NBA show, and then you would get one game a week. Was it NBA Inside Stuff? Is that the one that went viral, that went around the world? I can't remember now, sorry. But we would get that, and then so we had local basketball. We were all playing basketball, especially in Melbourne at that stage. And we had the game once a week. Stuff was in the newspapers, but the basketball cards became huge. But for whatever reason, I got hooked on that draft when I was about 91, 92. I suppose Australian rules football's drafts had just started, so I think drafts were quite interesting to me. And Dikembe Mutombo came out. They showed his highlights. His ability to block shots from nowhere was just incredible. So he went to the Nuggets, so I started supporting the Nuggets and just stuck with them. I still like the Pistons. I probably have, outside of my fascination with Dame Lillard and having most of his jerseys, I probably have mostly Nuggets and Pistons jerseys. And those are the NBA teams I'm most interested in. And I don't know if there's any other teams I really follow. I don't have an NFL team. I've got Oakland A stuff and Detroit Tiger stuff, but that's only because they're the only two baseball teams I saw them play each other in a playoff game at the Coliseum. It's not necessarily. I wouldn't say maybe I follow Oakland A little bit, but I'm as much interested in them trying to relocate. Don't have an NFL team, don't have an NHL team. I don't have a Premier League football team. I sort of briefly was interested in RCB. Kind of interested a little bit in Yorkshire and Surrey, I suppose, but not enough to follow them. Really, like I don't care if they win or lose, and I think that's the thing. And I don't really care if RCB win or lose either. So I don't really have that many sporting teams I follow anymore. It's actually one reason I really want to keep the Nuggets fandom going is because I want to keep thinking like a fan, and otherwise sometimes you slip too much into just being a journalist. Joel says, I've enjoyed the coverage of TalkSport and now prefer it to TMS coverage. Well, thank you. Will TalkSport or an alternative ever get England home test matches, or is the BBC ECB relationship too close? So I don't know if you saw, but there was a bit of a brouhaha. I've tweeted about this, Joel, and thank you. I'm really glad you like it. I was, involved from the start, and in fact, it was in this office that me and John had our first meetings of how TalkSport should be different to TMS. and this wasn't slandering TMS, but we wanted to make a different kind of product because you didn't want to just be TMS, but not on the BBC. It wouldn't have fit, right? We wanted it, and we wanted to build it as a commentary service that we wanted to listen to. And, you know, we've been really lucky with some of the people we've got involved. And I still think there's things we can fix and improve and everything else. But, and also if you're global and you can't listen to TalkSport, we now do live streams on YouTube for some series. So you can follow cricket commentary there. So many Americans were following for the England West Indies series. It was great. Look, there was basically the ECB made a massive error last year, and they gave the rights to the BBC again, when realistically a much smarter business decision would have been finding a way for both companies to come in. Australia now has, what, 3 or 4 companies that do broadcast radio. There aren't that many radio markets left in cricket. New Zealand, but they don't make much money in radio. England, Australia, India, again, doesn't make as much money as it should, although I think one day when digital radio becomes big, the Indian market will be quite an important one. South Africa, people do listen to radio over there, but cricket has been struggling. SABC, I don't think are doing the India-South Africa tests. I was actually hoping that TalkSport might be able to get the rights to those and do that, but Cricket South Africa, I don't know the full behind-the-scenes thing, but it didn't happen. I suppose is the best way of putting it in the end. You really don't want. I've always looked at it the same way. I think the way that broadcasting is done in cricket is incorrect, because essentially you sell all your rights to one company, and then everyone has to go to that company. But because that company has spent so much rights on it, they don't want clips on YouTube. They don't want other broadcasters. They don't want news stations to show more than whatever it is. So the ICC have it written into their contract, and this is for Indian companies. I don't know if this is the case altogether, but they have something written into their contract, if I'm not wrong, that says that cricket TV shows or sports TV shows can't show highlights of cricket, right? So newscasts can, and it's something like, I don't know, between 2 and 4 minutes worth of footage, but the others can't. I'm like, wait a minute. I want every single show in India to be broadcasting that we have cricket and getting more people hooked on it so that they have to come back and watch us live. And the same with radio. There are 2 major sports radio stations in the UK. If they both played cricket at the same time for 3-4 months of the year, you own those radio waves. It's the best ad you could ever have. And it's not like the ECB is making billions off radio rights. They should be looking at it the other way and going, okay, we'll give you the rights, but you have to broadcast from inside the ground, perhaps. Or we'll give you the rights, but if you want access to a big box and a green room and all this sort of stuff, you have to pay extra, or whatever it may be. You should want more people to broadcast your cricket. Honestly, the way the ECB do it is so stupid, right? And I'm not afraid to say that. I've said it publicly before. When they gave these rights to the BBC, I think I went on a Twitter rampage about this, because the way we grow our game and the way that ECB specifically, but I could go through every single board. I just happen to know more about the business of the ECB in some cases, is so stupid. The Cricket Australia model is much smarter. I still think they do some things wrong, but the Cricket Australia model is much smarter overall. Cricket is spread out over a bunch of different networks, which means that they all have to promote cricket for you, right? It's probably in the wrong way, and it obviously should have gone to Channel 10, and there should have been a separate deal in another way for other games, etc., etc. But you're listening to radio in Australia during a test match day. If it's a talkback station, it's like a 30% chance it's going to be cricket on it, right? Absolutely brilliant, right? You can't get away from it at that point. And so I do think there's a huge problem there. I don't know why the BBC and the ECB did an agreement together when TalkSport were dead keen for the rights this time. I don't know why the ECB went so early. It just, to me, it's a massive error. And it's one of those errors that this is why the 100 exists. Because cricket is still being pushed to the same people over and over again, and it's not finding new demographics. TalkSport is a new demographic. And the fact that TalkSport, and I think the ECB had coverage on the fact that TalkSport have won 2 awards for their cricket coverage so far, major radio awards. And they had cover there to go, well, actually, TalkSport's doing a great job. We want to encourage them to keep doing this. But TalkSport do have a lot of rights coming up. I think it's majorly overseas stuff. For me, financially, would probably be a lot better if TalkSport did the home tests. Although, having said that, there are probably years when I do so much with TalkSport that maybe not doing the home test would be better for my life rather than my finances. So it's a bit up and down. So I do have a vested interest in that. But I don't just want TalkSport and BBC to do it. I want LBC to get the rights. I want some random radio station that I don't even know of, that's an independent radio station that people listen to do it. I want like 4 or 5 stations to be able to do it because I want cricket to be bigger in the place where I'm making the majority of my money. But also, I want it to be bigger everywhere. I want every country to be doing this, right? To be finding a way to do this. On top of that, looking at things like there have been some boards who have literally almost paid companies to do their radio broadcasting and then taken the stream and put up on their YouTube and boosted their YouTube numbers, right? There's so many different things you can do with radio commentary. We can't always be watching cricket, right? It is a physical impossibility for so many people, right? Let's make it as accessible as possible. And this is a way of doing it through what is the far lesser rights. I don't know what the difference between TV and radio rights are, but I don't think radio rights are even 1% of cricket's overall marketplace, right? Compared to TV rights and streaming rights. Use that then to actually build up an audience. And the other thing is that cricket is such a brilliant sport for radio, right? Like not all sports are. Tennis is terrible. I hate tennis on radio. Golf, oh my God, why do they put golf on the radio, right? Cricket is a brilliant sport on radio, like most of the football codes are, but it goes for longer. There's so many advantages for having it and for getting it out there. And I do think that they have made a massive error, and not just them, but so many sports boards, the way that they handle cricket and radio. And as I said, I do have a vested interest in this. I've worked for ABC. I worked for Test Match Sofa back in the day. I've worked for TalkSport. I worked for BBC as well. That's every radio. I might have been on SABC once, but probably just for interviews. I can't remember. But I have a vested interest in this because I love cricket on the radio, and it makes my job easier. The more cricket there's on the radio, I listen to a lot of BBL on the radio. That's because it is available to me, and at that time of the day, it's easier for me to listen to it. And then when I get a chance, I can get the iPad out and watch it, or watch it on my screen. So whatever that is the situation, whatever that situation is. So yeah, I do think there is a way forward here, right across the sport. But most importantly, Joel, I'm glad that you like TalkSport because I'm on it. Rob says, do you think it is wiser for Cornwall, Shazad, and the like to take tips from a Sharma or a Finch than want to be a Kohli or a Maxwell? Oh, we're talking about fitness. Yeah, so if you're talking about fitness, and I think you are. So I did a big piece on Aaron Finch, and I talked to about 5 or 6 people who knew him quite well. And they were quite interesting when they were saying that he had no body fat on his legs at all, but obviously had quite a bit, above his waist. And yes, he smoked and drank, and maybe wasn't, the greatest athlete ever. But Maxwell drinks a lot, right? And I think we all know that. And he doesn't put on weight in that same way. And so I think there are. I saw this incredible. I think it was a TikTok, maybe it was an article I read recently about how the majority of personal trainers are people who are naturally fit, right? That it doesn't take them a lot to take weight off, and that they get muscular quite easily. Like I was talking about my fitness regime recently compared to someone who was really, really fit, who had like a 6-pack, and they were like, and obviously diet plays a part in all this as well. But they were saying that's actually a really good. Like you should be more strong than you are, but I don't put muscle back on, right? So even if I do lose a lot of weight, I usually just look gaunt because I don't put any muscle back on in my body, and so there is an element of this that happens, and so the people who do it naturally kind of look at it, and it's the same with cricket. Cornwall and Shazad, look, Cornwall and Aaron Finch are not the same body type, right? And Sharma and Shazad are probably not the same body type. I do think we need to allow that there are very different kinds of body types in cricket. And we have never allowed for that, really probably, well, certainly since the 70s, since professionalism came in, we haven't really allowed for the fact that there are things that Raheem Cornwall's body is more suited for than Matthew Short's body is, right? And there are things that Matthew Short's body is more suited to than Raheem Cornwall's is. And if we take away those, if we pretend that all cricketers need to be the same body shape, it doesn't make any sense. That was my issue with the South Africa time trial. Cricketers don't actually need to do a time trial. They need to do fitness-dependent stuff for their positions. And I really don't believe that they do that. And I think that's where we should be starting, not worrying about things like this. Arco says, latest Red Inker about Bosie, you said that only 2 players have ever mastered. That wasn't the Red Inker, was it? That was Footmarks, wasn't it? With me and Bayram, I think. But yeah, only 2 players ever mastered the flipper, Warne and that one really old Aussie leggy. Clary Grimmett. What's unique about the flipper that's so hard to bowl? This is going to be terrible for anyone listening. But I have a cricket ball. A flipper is, and I think I can explain this in a way that people at home can listen, but it will sound so bizarre that it almost sounds unbelievable when you say it out loud. A flipper is essentially a ball where you have to hold the shiny side. I believe Warne could hold the seam, but I think in general, most people who bowl it at a lower level hold the shiny side. And then you click your fingers with the ball in your fingers, right? So instead of clicking like, this is the podcast. No, I can't click. What's wrong with my fingers? There we go. Instead of clicking normally, you do the exact same movement, but with the ball in your hand. And if you're watching the YouTube now, Jesus Christ, you can see why it doesn't work very well. You can see now, I'm going to have to watch it, aren't I? That sound effect was real of the ball flying around my office. It's really hard to control. And the other thing is, it's really hard to sort of get your hand side on to do it, so that when you do it, it goes straight towards the batter. Then you have to get enough backward revolutions on the ball to make it so it skids through. What else? You then need to have it so it comes out at normal arm pace, so it's clearly a different. So I think bowlers can. There are a lot of bowlers who can put the backspin on it, but they bowl it so slow that it doesn't matter. And there are other bowlers who can bowl it at a good pace, but they don't put enough backspin on it for it to skid through when it gets to the other end. Look, it's a remarkable ball, but you can see just from there. I can actually do it, and I, for some reason, just then shit the bed when I was live on camera. But it is very, it's very hard. So I can do it over about 18 yards. Well, before I ruin my shoulder and my elbow, so I probably won't be able to do it anymore. Not that have anything to do with me just stuffing it up there, but I can do it over about 18 yards. I can get it out there and I can skid it down the other end. But over a full pitch, mine just sort of end up floating and don't do anything at all. I reckon I've landed one in my life when I've done it. It's not an easy ball to go. It's not an easy ball to bowl. It's not an easy ball to hide. It's not an easy ball to master. There's nothing easy about it. Right. And that was one of my big arguments when everyone was like, oh, we should keep the deucer in. It's such a great ball. Like everyone should be able to bowl it. It's like, well, no, maybe it's better that no one can bowl it. A bit like the knuckle pitch in baseball. Like almost no one can ever master it. I like that. Anmol with a super chat. Thank you, Anmol. Why is there a distinction between runs versus leg byes versus byes determined by the umpire? Is there any other sport which umpires determine something completely inconsequential to the match result? I'm trying to think about why that matters. I suppose it gives us a little bit more information about the batters. Batters should only get runs off the bat. Yeah, I suppose. I mean, it's interesting you've asked this on a day today when someone's asked about a similar thing for baseball. So baseball does do it. It's just that scorers do it, don't they? I don't think the umpires out on the field do it. So baseball does do it as well. And you have errors and unearned runs and earned runs and all those sorts of things. You could argue You could argue very similar things for rebounds and assists in basketball. Again, the scorers rather than the referees. I can't think of any good answer for that, Amol. It might stick in my head, and I'll come up with it another day. But it's an interesting question for sure. No one knows. 2023 says, did the 1980s West Indies fast bowlers consistently bowl at 90 miles an hour? Were they generally around 82 to 83 miles with occasional bursts at 90 miles an hour? Well, they weren't really at 90 miles an hour, I suppose, is the best way of answering that. We know that Andy Roberts and Michael Holding were probably high 80s. Patrick Patterson and Colin Croft were probably low 90s. Just Garner, I don't know if Garner was ever accurately measured. So I don't know where he goes. Malcolm Marshall would have been probably high 80s. But the truth is that, yeah, bowlers didn't bowl as consistently fast back then, even though they could have, just because that wasn't how cricket was played. Like if you were trying to bowl outswing, you generally would slow it down a little bit more. And before wickets got rock hard as well, you were using the conditions of the pitch a little bit more, and all those sorts of things. But you listen to those old bowlers, and they talk about really slowing down, especially in county cricket and everything else. So Alex Tudor said that, and there's a really good podcast about this that we did together, where he said that the speed camera really changed everything for bowlers, because in the old days you would go, okay, I'm coming back on for this third spell. What we really want to do here is keep it a little bit tight. We've got a couple of middle order players who are well set. We're going to put some pressure on them through the scoreboard. We don't want to bowl any bad balls. So let's bring it back. He probably bowled, 85, 87 miles an hour. So he's like, okay, I want to bring it down to 80 miles an hour and just make sure that they can't get anything away and bowl a hard length. He would do that for 5 overs. If he did that now, everyone would be like, oh, he's not trying hard enough. Right? But bowlers did do that all the time. It was a really common thing to do. So that they could bowl a faster spell when they needed it later on, right? So that they weren't ruining their bodies all the time. Now bowlers are bowling very close to maximum all the time, and yeah, it does cause a lot of issues. No one knows. So I would assume no one was bowling. Maybe someone like Patrick Patterson, Colin Croft would have bowled fairly consistently fast. Maybe more so Patrick Patterson than Colin Croft, I would have thought. So Patrick Patterson was really pushed to bowl consistently fast, is my memory of him. I don't think that's quite the case with as much with Colin Croft. And the West Indies quite often will drag their length back and bowl dry. And you don't always want to be at your top speed for that. You want to be accurate for that as well. So yeah, I do think there was I think there was just a lot more. The bowlers were given the ability to decide, and then maybe a captain would go up and go, sorry, I need you at 100% right now, right? And I do think that's very different to what we see at the moment. All right, let us just have another break, and then after the break, I'll get to what's left. I'm Jarrod Kimber, and this is the Wagon Wheel. Want to have live chats with me, or just connect with other cricket fans on Discord that also enjoy my content? Or a few AMAs. Maybe you want early podcast episodes or ad-free content, or want to receive my emailer. You can get all of this on our Patreon, plus a little bit of behind the scenes stuff as well. Huge thanks to everyone who has supported us on Patreon so far. You are all part of this channel's success. All right. What's up to? Why have I lost my messages? Oh, here we go. Abhinav with another super chat. Thank you for everyone for the super chats today. Abhinav says, in the age of players resting from tours, is the concept of central contracts outdated? No, I would say that's the opposite, isn't it? So in the days when you had to play in every game to get paid, that's when you wouldn't rest, right? Because you wouldn't get your extra payment unless you really need it mentally or physically. You wouldn't do that. Whereas now it makes more sense for teams to actually give central contracts so that they can rest players, so that the players don't feel like they have to push themselves 100% all the time. I think central contracts are really, really important. I don't think people understand how important they are to players. That's why we don't have many freelance players, is because players really need it. I think we might have done a podcast on this a while back, but training facilities. If you're not centrally contracted or you don't have a contract with someone, you don't have access to professional services unless you pay for them. You don't have access to net bowlers. You don't have access to coaches. You don't have access to throwdowns. You don't have access to balls. Those balls all cost 100 quid each, right? All those things really, really matter. So all those things are really, really important. I think I want to say this. I think it was there has been a move towards that sort of basketball style of having your own personal trainers and everything else, but it's still hard to get good net bowlers because the net bowlers are contracted and they probably can only bowl. So even if they're young, they can probably only bowl so many overs and everything else. So it's really, really tough to be able to do that. Insurance, huge, absolutely huge. Rehab, right? All these things are why players need those. But if you don't really want players just paying themselves through match fees. Match fees don't pay very much, right? So you'd have to change the match fees system. But also, I think that's a terrible idea because then your players will play even when they're injured, even when they shouldn't. And it'd be harder for you to say you can't play because you're not paying them. It's much easier for you to go, actually, it's okay to be rested from this one. We're going to try someone else. That's fine. Or we think you're hitting the red zone as a bowler. Can we just pull you out of this series? So I'd certainly, Abhinav would say that. Thank you for the super chat. Newman, your take on Angelo Matthews timed out. You have to go back to the videos at the time to have a look at it. My biggest thing was that Angelo Matthews made an error and then told everyone else that they also made errors. And I think I think communication was the biggest thing here, but Angelo Matthews also didn't communicate. I saw a game. It must have been when I was commentating TalkSport, unless it was the women's test match, which also I would have been commentating for TalkSport. But I saw a game where someone came out with the wrong gloves. I don't know if they had two of the same glove. I think that was the case. They came out with two right gloves. They went straight to the umpire and they said, "I have two right gloves. Am I okay to get these replaced?" The umpire said, "Of course. Go and get those. Go and get that fixed." Angelo Matthews didn't do that. And then afterwards, he expected the umpires to have known his helmet was breaking. They obviously thought it was an excuse. Again, they could have looked. There was footage. There's many different things that could have gone, that could have been changed then. The captain, Shakib Al Hassan, didn't have all the information because the umpires didn't have all the information, right? So from that point of view, I thought it was just a communication thing. But again, this hadn't happened before. And that's kind of how these things go. But I do think in cricket, the majority of those sorts of issues do come from the fact that people don't talk to each other properly on the field. And there is I think there is an element of batters just deciding they can get anything they want at any time. And we are moving away from that a little bit as a sport after moving towards it for probably a good part of the last 20 years, right? And so that's quite an interesting thing as well. Path says, even the quality of highlights shown in cricket matches is crap. India, not India, everywhere. They cover an entire 100-over game in 3 minutes, focusing on sixes and wickets rather than actual turning points. Oh, Path. I thought I could finish this podcast here. And you've answered. Okay. I have the ability, I pay for this, but I have the ability on my NBA app, at the end of a game, I can look at all the highlight possessions of Denver Nuggets. Can look at all the highlight possessions of Denver Nuggets and the team that played against them. Can also look at every single possession. I don't have to worry about the guy bouncing the ball up or waiting forever for a free throw to be taken or timeouts or anything like that. So every NBA game, I think that you can look at it as a 5-minute package, a 10-minute package, or a 30-minute package, which allows you to see the vast majority of your best offensive stuff, the vast majority of the other team's best offensive stuff, or every single possession, but still down to 30 minutes. So in 2 hours, I can watch 4 basketball games if I want to. All right. So I usually, if I can, I'll probably watch more of the Nuggets games, depending on the game, who they're playing and what happened in it, because I usually wake up for it. But sometimes I obviously just don't have that time. And I can watch one of these other packages. But, I probably watch a good amount. But I also like to see what, Giannis and Embiid are up to, what Steph Curry is up to, why the Pistons keep losing. Indiana Pacers, they're fun as hell at the moment. So that's the team I'm watching. Last year, I was watching a lot of OKC. Probably should be watching more of OKC this year. Orlando Magic. Like, I can watch all those things and just go, bang. Okay, I just want to know what this is. How's Trey? I haven't seen a Trey Young game in ages. If I just watch 5 minutes of these clips, I'll see all of his best moves and see how he's going. Or I can watch the 10 minutes and I can see his worst stuff on defense as well. In cricket, I can't do any of that. All right. All these boards have all this ball by ball stuff. They could, at the end of each day, put it out and allow us to buy it. Membership for the year, membership for the month, membership for a series, whatever they want. And I should be able to do it. It is all available. And they do not allow us to have it. They're literally pissing away money, but also putting out highlights reels, which are like the highlights clips that you see out there. I never watch a basketball highlights clip, right? And I don't watch a lot of, I suppose I do watch some cricket highlights clips just when I don't have a choice. And I don't see what I'm learning from them. The ECB ones for years, and I can't remember if they still do this, would have the batters walking out to the middle on the highlights. What the fuck do I need to see batters walking out to the wicket for? What are you fucking doing? Why would I ever need to see batters walking out to the crease? How is that a highlight? Who is making these things? It just makes me so angry. It's our sport, and they don't even give it to us. Oh, God, yeah. I can't wait to see more of Matty Pryor and Ian Bell's ass walk out to the wickets. Apologies to those two guys. Fantastic asses. But you see what I'm saying here, right? As you've said, Paul, some of the highlights are not even the highlights. It's just a wicket or a six. It really, really pisses me off that we don't cover cricket better. You see a great spell of bowling. Great. It's a T20 game. Show me all 24 balls of this dude. What did he do? Right? That's what should be happening. We tried to do some of that during the World Cup with like Aiden Markram. We tried to show every ball of you just learn so much more. You're learning about the game, but it's a better highlight, and it can still be 3 minutes. Put them both out. And they occasionally do it. And anyway, our game should fucking. Anyway, Joel says, many thanks for the answer. I do like the YouTube streams that TalkSport do now. Would love it if you had a ball in the studio to demonstrate seam position. It's a very good point. We used to have a bat and a ball that we always had around when we didn't even have the cameras on us, Joel. As you can see here, it's really, I say that. My ball's now rolling around the back of my office somewhere, but it's a really handy thing to have. And sometimes it's really hard to explain things over the radio anyway, without a prop in your hand. So I will pass that on, but thank you. Ayosh says, ICC seem to be concerned about the optics with regards to, is that what WRT means? That makes sense. Humanitarian and political messages. With the Khawaja stuff and T20 World Cup schedule announcement around the same time, it hasn't been smart, has it? I've talked about this before, but it's just that if they don't step it down, it's very rare I come on the administration or boards side of things, because usually they're just wrong anyway. But I will say this: if they don't step down on it, it just gets out of control, and everyone starts doing it. And you have AIDS deniers out there saying that there is no AIDS, or AIDS came from people having sex with monkeys, or whatever it was the Foo Fighters used to believe. You get stuff like that. We just like, wait a minute, what? Or flat Earth. There will be a cricketer that believes in that the Earth is flat, right? Do we really want that on someone's shoes? And so I think it kind of works the way it should work, which is you come out, and if you're willing to be fined and you believe in something enough, then you can do it. I don't really want to be in a situation where we start having, men's rights activists. I can tell you there's quite a few players who are men's rights activists out there talking about, some of the nonsense red pill stuff. Reminder that men's rights activists believe that they are red pilled, and that is a story about a person and his mum's trying to give him diarrhea medication, by the way. Anyway, I understand why they do it, but I also understand why they're going to look silly for doing it, and they will quite often, more often than not. But I kind of like the fact that if you're a player and you want to do something on the field, there's nothing we can do to stop you doing it, right? But there are consequences to that. And so that means that you might be suspended, or you might be fined, or it might affect your career but you're willing to do that because you care so much about that issue, right? That I like that element to it, right? I do, because I do think it stops a lot of the, you know, we should have a National Men's Day. Well, you do have a National Men's Day, you fucking idiots. Tino says, thoughts on the Tom Curran incident? I mean, it's wild. For those who haven't seen, he suddenly decides that he's going to practice by running in on the wicket, which, as far as I'm aware, outside of some commentators, who probably also shouldn't be on the wicket, the captain and the coach are the only two that are allowed out on the wicket. As an analyst, I wasn't allowed on the wicket. I had to stay on the side. Players aren't allowed to stand on the wicket. Tom Curran suddenly starts to run through, right? And I don't think he had spikes on. I think he had trainers on, although I might be wrong. But it doesn't matter. He's not allowed to run on the wicket. And so he tries to do it at one end, and then he ends up doing it at the other end, and then he ends up running through the umpire aggressively. There's just no reason for that to happen in cricket. I don't know what happened. I don't know why he got so angry at that umpire. It's a really crazy one, Tino. I mean, I don't know if I have anything like incredible to say about it, because it's just like, how has this happened? Why has this happened? I thought the whole thing was just utterly bizarre from beginning to end. And it looks terrible for Tom Curran. I don't know Tom. I don't think I've ever even chatted to him. Yeah, I mean, maybe interviewed him once. I can't even think of that. It doesn't seem to be like a Tom Curran thing to do. Like, when I first said it, I was like, oh, there could be more to it than this. And then you watch the footage, and you're like, dude, what are you doing? Bizarre. The whole thing is bizarre. And he deserves to be suspended, right? Like, he did the wrong thing and deserved to be suspended. And it's been a wild BBL. I kind of feel like there's just been a lot of random stuff. The BBL does seem to be a tournament because it's almost more interesting for the weird shit that happens than it is for the cricket. And when I say almost, it definitely is more interesting for the weird shit that happens. I mean, it's a tournament that started with Marlon Samuels and Shane Warne, right? Like, they were basically the ones who got it on the map. That's me for today. Just huge thanks to everyone. Heaps of super chats today. So Tino, I don't know if I said this before, Newman Turbo, Abhinav Sharma, No One Knows 2023, Anmol, and Shrikant was up the top. Big thanks to everyone. As I said, all the money, Patreon, super chats, everything goes back into investing in this channel, so I can afford batteries for the lights behind me, which apparently I do actually have already, the batteries, but just realized I haven't turned them on. I haven't put them in. But thanks to everyone for the comments. Every comment that you put on during a live or whatever helps the algorithm and everything else. I know it's a bit of a weird time of the year. We will be back soon. I might have to move Wagon Wheel around a little bit, and obviously me and Bayram have to do a foot marks. We are backlogged with videos because they had mostly been written. I just wasn't well enough to record them. I think Estelle's got one out. I've got one out. So that, I've got a couple, I think, that I can do. We will get to them, but it will take a little while. I think I can announce here that we'll be doing the live scoreboard, which is the shows at the end of the day's play for India versus South Africa, for those ones. So we're doing shows. So usually that's about half an hour of me talking through things that we saw and what was interesting in the day's play, and then half an hour of your questions. So hopefully we'll be doing that pretty much every day. I might miss day 5. Yeah, I might miss day 5, but I'll try and do that for almost every day of the test matches of those 2 series. We'll be doing the same for India-England, but India-England, I will be commentating that for TalkSport. And I don't know if I'll be in India or in England. I don't know what my situation is there. And I don't know whether I can record in TalkSport studios or not. So that will be a little bit more seat of our pants. But that is the idea, is to have the scoreboard for those 2 series, and then probably, hopefully, for a lot of the IPL as well. And then we'll take it from there. But we've got absolute ton of stuff. Estelle, Cheyenne have written some great stuff that I just haven't recorded yet. I've got a Nathan Lyon thing that should have been out ready for when he retired when he took his 500th wicket. Unfortunately, some things got there. Heaps of stuff. Thank you to everyone for supporting us again, and we will see you again next time. I don't know when that is, but I'm guessing that we'll be recording pretty soon for Uncovered, and there'll be another Footmarks, and then Wagon Wheel will probably be in about 4 or 5 days' time, if I am not mistaken. I'm Jarrod Kimber. This is the Wagon Wheel. See you again next time. Like, subscribe. Definitely subscribe. Subscribe. Why are you not subscribing? What's wrong with you? Click the bell icon. Comment. Tell your mum. I'll see you next time. Calling all sports nerds. If you dream of a career within sports, consider joining my course, Fans with Laptops. It looks at features, pods, video essays, and kind of everything else I've ever made, plus a lot of content sharing techniques. It is my brain and career exposed for your benefit. Fans with Laptops will help you channel your passion and maximize your potential. Enroll now for a small fee and embark on your sports journey today.